Welcome to Beyond the Books. I'm Nate Eaton. Thanks for being with us. This is a brand new segment EastIdahoNews.com is launching in conjunction with Idaho Education News. Joining me, Devin Bodkin. He is the Eastern Idaho reporter with IdahoEdNews.org. That's the website. If you haven't been there, you should check it out. What exactly do you guys do for those people that haven't heard of you?
Idaho Ed News is a Boise-based nonprofit, and we cover education across the state. It's a team of journalists and some former educators, me, and we cover education, investigative news, breaking news, and fluffy features.
Nice features, in-depth features about students.
Yeah, sometimes.
You've probably, if you follow EastIdahoNews.com regularly, you've seen their stories that we share content back and forth. And this is a segment that we want to launch, a regular segment. We will go a little in-depth on important issues. We'll go in depth about education here in Eastern Idaho and across the state. Devin, you said you taught. Give us some background on your education.
So yeah, I taught in Blackfoot. I was a high school English teacher. And before that I was a news reporter in Pocatello. I love teaching, but I've always been a journalist at heart, I think. And so I've been able to be a part of Idaho Education News expanding their coverage out to East Idaho a couple years ago. And so I saw that as an opportunity to be able to kind of keep one foot in education and one doing what I like to do in journalism. So it's been great.
One of the stories you put up recently was about charter schools. There is a huge demand in the Gem State for parents who want to have their children go to these schools. What did you find out?
Well, it was interesting. That started from a phone call. I was talking to a charter school director here in Idaho Falls, Michelle Ball, over at Alturas International Academy near Old Town, and she just sort of in passing mentioned that they had 500 kids waiting to get into their school, and I thought, wow, that's a lot of kids, and this is just one fairly small charter school here in East Idaho. And so we did a survey and reached out to charter schools across the state, 57 of them. They serve about 22,000 kids now in their 20th year. They're all celebrating their 20th year in Idaho. And the numbers just started to roll in, and before we got all the numbers back, we were at close to 11,000 kids on wait lists to get into these schools. And I should say that that number is probably a little bit inflated because there are parents who put their kids on multiple lists. Mm-hmm. But we were sort of shocked. I mean, there are all of these parents who are looking for something else when it comes to education. Is
this a thing mainly in Eastern Idaho or statewide?
It's statewide.
The demand is everywhere.
Mm-hmm. The demand's all over the state. Probably some places more than others, but yeah.
So what did you find out? Why is there such a demand? Why do these parents want their kids in these schools?
Well, we've done surveys in the past too. We've conducted polls, and they show that most parents have a positive view of charter schools. Many parents think that they outperform traditional public schools. And so there's this perception that they are higher performing. And so a lot of parents look at it for that reason. I think a lot of parents, sometimes they are just looking for something different sometimes too. But it's a very controversial issue across the state. Charter schools some are very high performing, but they're also some of the lowest performing in the state too. And so the idea that just because it's a charter school doesn't necessarily mean that it will be a high performing school. We have, at Idaho Education News, we have a really cool resource for families called Idaho Ed Trends. And that's something I think parents should visit before they put their kids in any school. It basically has up-to-date performance measures, statistics, student to teacher ratios, population, funding, and so it's good to do the research before you just put your kid into any school. But the perception is that from many Idahoans is that charter schools outperform traditional schools.
This seems to be a movement kind of across the country. I know when I lived in Virginia, charter schools started to pop up, and there'd be lottery systems where they would actually show up and draw names out of a turnstile type thing. Explain how charter schools are funded. Are they part of school districts to traditional school systems? How does that work here in Idaho for those that might not know?
So by definition, a charter school is a school that operates typically from outside of a school district, but they are funded very similarly. In Idaho, it's a complex funding formula, but it's based mostly on average daily attendance. So the number of kids coming to the school on a daily basis is what brings dollars into schools. Charter schools are funded on that same measure. There are a couple differences though. They can't bond for infrastructure like a traditional school district. You know, Idaho Falls has run a couple bonds in the last couple years. Charter schools can't do that, and so they have to get a little more creative sometimes on how they find infrastructure, how they create infrastructure. It's interesting, Pocatello is, there's a charter school in Pocatello right now that's going to be moving into the Pine Ridge Mall, into the Sears building. And so you'll see some of that. Alturas, which we mentioned earlier, they're in the old OE Bell building. That was a school years and years ago. So it was a little easier for them to, you know, kind of change the infrastructure to what they need. But you will see that.
So exactly what percentage of students do we know are attending charter schools here in Idaho?
It's growing, but it's still pretty small percent, 7.5% roughly. That's about 22,000 kids. There's just over 300,000 kids in Idaho's public K-12 school system.
Okay, so explain the difference between charter versus, we know public, versus private. Are some of these charters private or are they separate?
No, and that sometimes is a misconception that people have, because sometimes people look at the charter schools and they say they look like private schools, but they're not. And the difference is that students don't pay to enroll. If they get in through the lottery system, or if the school has enough seats and they just get in, they would be able to receive a free public education like they would in a traditional school district. That's not the case in a private school.
Now, one of the things that you've reported on at Idaho Education News is that there is sometimes a lack of diversity at charter schools. What have you been able to find out about that?
So overall, they serve fewer minority and poorer students. And folks opposed to charter schools often point to that as a reason for their overall average higher performance.
The higher performance on tests at charter schools, because there's less minorities, that sometimes the minorities may test lower.
Minority and poor students may perform at a lower level.
Do we know why there are not more minorities at these charter schools?
I did a report a year ago and spent some time talking to some minorities in East Idaho, some Hispanic families, and largely what I got was that they really don't know what a charter school is. I could show them the school and they didn't know what it was, or they thought that it was a private school. But that's not the case for all of them. Some did know what a charter school was, and there are minority students who do go to charter schools across the state, but overall their numbers are lower in the charter schools.
Have you been able to find in your reporting is there any sort of conflict between public schools and charter schools? I know I have a brother-in-law who's a principal at a public school, and he said, don't you dare sign your kids up for those charter schools. I mean, is there a little bit of that?
Yeah. I mentioned earlier, it is a pretty touchy subject for people across the state. While advocates see it as, you know, a choice, and they want the opportunity to have a choice, to put their kids in a school other than the traditional school district that they go to if they don't like what's happening there, or if they just want to find something that might work better for the kid. So that choice is really important to folks on that side of the issue. On the other side of the issue, it is a big debate. Many traditional school districts will say that charter schools pull funding from them. And as I mentioned earlier, the state's funding formula for schools is largely based on average daily attendance. And so as these schools pop up within districts' boundaries and kids go to them, they're taking those dollars with them. And that's something that a lot of traditional educators take issue with. Boise School District's an example of this. They're in the Treasure Valley, they've experienced a lot of growth in recent years, but the Boise School District in recent years has actually lost students. And there are other options besides charter schools, including parochial schools and online schools in Idaho. But you know, they see charter schools as playing a direct role in that loss in enrollment.
Well, you can read Devin's story about charter schools on idahoednews.org, also eastidahonews.com. We'll put a link down below so that you can go right to it. Devin, we're going to talk about different topics, every single one of these Beyond the Book segments, at least once, maybe twice a month. If a hot topic comes up, we might throw on an extra one. What subjects do you foresee us taking on over the next couple of months?
I don't know. There's education is such a huge issue in this state.
That impacts everybody.
There's so much to it. The politics, the student performance, just the feature stories that we run with schools doing just interesting and cool things. I think any and all of that would be stuff that we could talk about and hopefully get some people on here to chat with us, educators throughout East Idaho. We cover education issues across the state, but I specifically work out here in East Idaho, and so this would be great to bring some of those stories that have that slant on them to the show.
And we want to know your ideas too, so let us know. If you have ideas you want us to look into, Idaho Ed News to look into, please let us know. And if you are interested in coming on here and chatting with us about particular topics that you're passionate about dealing with education, we will include our contact information on the lower third. Reach out to Devin. You can let us know. Thanks, Devin.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. This has been Beyond the Books. We'll see you next time.